Chapter 12, Section 1. Last we talked about the Greeks. They had lost their independence. Greek culture and customs still spread, though. There were many people that spoke the Greek language. You know, their architecture was copied by many. Plays were popular entertainment. This new period is going to be called the Hellenistic Age, which means like the Hellenes or the Greeks. Greece has a new ruler by 338 BC, and that would be Philip II of Macedonia. Macedonia was north of Greece. Sometimes you see it referred to as Macedon. It was small. It was mountainous. Most of the people were farmers. The Macedonians didn't necessarily care about the Greeks, but they admired the culture. And so Philip had become ruler of Macedonia back in 359 BC. When Philip was young, Philip was actually a hostage. A hostage, meaning a person held by the enemy until different promises are carried out. Philip was a hostage, and he was held in the Greek city-state of Thebes for 3 years. And while being a hostage in Thebes, he learned to love Greek culture. But what he hated was the weak Greek government. Philip wanted to unify the city-states. He wanted to spread Greek culture. And once he becomes ruler of Macedonia, he's going to spend 20 years conquering the Greeks. He turned his army into a professional army, not a volunteer army. And they would have a new infantry formation. He developed a new infantry formation called the phalanx, which had soldiers 16 rows deep. And they stood so close together that their shields would overlap, which gives them more protection. The soldiers would use 14-foot-long spears, twice as long as a normal spear. The soldiers were trained with slingshots and bow and arrows. So if they were in a hilly area where a phalanx couldn't go, they had, other weapons they were trained with. Let's take a look here at Philip II and his Macedonian phalanx.
The year is 359 BC, and the kingdom of Macedonia lies on the brink of destruction, its army defeated and people in despair. Yet all hope is not lost, as the new king, Philip, is keen to revert his kingdom's fortunes. He would embark on one of the most revolutionary, all-encompassing military reforms in antiquity. This new sub-series will take an in-depth look at these reforms, starting with their origins and the revolutionary changes Philip made to his infantry. Our story first takes us outside of Macedonia. Contrary to what one might have expected, Philip spent little time in his homeland during his youth. Due to the fragility of Macedonia, he spent most of his adolescence as a hostage, first at the court of the Illyrians and then at Thebes. It was while Philip was residing in Thebes that his ideas of military reform started forming. In 371 BC, the balance of power between the mainland Greek cities would be shaken to its core. At Leuctra, the Thebans won a stunning victory against the Spartans, becoming the dominant power on the Greek mainland. The reason behind this unprecedented victory was the military innovation of Epaminondas and Pelopidas. Most notable among the Theban innovations were those that radically improved the Theban infantry. Not only had Epaminondas' concentration of his Theban hoplite phalanx in deeper ranks shattered the opposing Spartans, but the creation of an elite, professional infantry body, the Sacred Band, provided Thebes with a force that proved equal to the famed Spartan warriors. Thanks to these reforms, the military might of Sparta finally met its match. Philip quickly concluded that the secret of Thebes' newfound military supremacy lay in the constant practice, constant experience, and constant action of its army. Its professionalism was its key. At the same time, the reforms of the renowned Athenian general Iphicrates also greatly impressed the young Macedonian. Iphicrates reformed the equipment of the Athenian infantry. The heavier bronze hoplite armor was replaced with lighter linen cuirasses, and the large hoplon shield with a lighter pelter, and new longer spears were used. All this increased the reach of their weapons and provided the soldiers with increased mobility. Although these reforms did not stand the test of time with the Athenian infantry, scholars assume that this style of fighting was used by the hoplites fighting at sea, as the increased spear length and improved flexibility proved useful when attacking adjacent enemy vessels. Military innovation was therefore a common theme among the mainland Greeks in the early 4th century BC, and Philip was a quick learner. In 365 BC, Philip returned to Macedonia. He had learnt a lot from the reforms of Epaminondas, Pelopidas, and Iphicrates, as would soon become evident. The death of Philip's elder brother, Perdiccas, in a battle against the Illyrians in 359 BC, brought Philip to an abrupt ascension to the Macedonian throne. Macedonia was surrounded by enemies and had never been weaker. Another invasion looked imminent. Having secured his throne from rival claimants, Philip set about reforming the Macedonian army, putting into practice what he had learned from his time as a hostage. Arguably, the army branch Philip revolutionized the most was the infantry. Limited evidence survives, but it is likely that the foot soldiers that Philip inherited were mostly light infantry, recruited from a peasant class that lived in poverty. They were usually ill-equipped, had no training, and were no match for the superior infantry of their neighbors, most notably the Illyrians. It appears that the Macedonian infantry also included an elite unit armed in the Greek hoplite fashion. However, these hoplites were few and were outclassed by their Illyrian counterparts. The Macedonian infantry was in dire need of a change. Remembering the Theban and Athenian reforms, Philip quickly recruited 4,000 Macedonian levies and equipped them for a radically new style of fighting. For their armor, Philip equipped his Macedonians with a blend of the heavy hoplite and the lighter Greek peltast panoply. Each soldier was fitted with a bronze helmet, greaves, tall boots, and a cloth tunic. Unlike the hoplites of their southern neighbors, these recruits were not outfitted in heavy breastplates and had much lighter body armor. The lighter protection was compensated by the new weapon, the sarissa. Their deadly new armament was a 4 to 6 meter long pike. Its shaft was made from cornel wood, the best available in the Greek world at the time. Macedonia was famed for such high-quality timber, and Philip acquired significant supplies of it to create his new weapon with ease. At one end of the sarissa was an iron tip. Its streamlined head was designed specially to penetrate armor and continue through into the enemy's body. At the opposite end of the pike was a heavy metal butt. Made of either iron or bronze, this butt was designed to act as a counterweight, offering the wielder more balance when holding the sarissa 3/4 of the way down the shaft. Its shape could also anchor the pike into the ground when bracing for an enemy charge. Just as with the high-quality cornel wood, bronze and iron were also readily available in Macedonia, providing Philip with easy accessibility to the materials required for making these new, deadly offensive weapons. Unlike the shorter spears of the hoplites, the sheer length and weight of the sarissa meant that each Macedonian soldier required both his hands to carry it. Carrying a heavy shield as well was impossible. Philip's men were thus equipped with a smaller, lighter shield called a pelter. The pelter was commonly used by the Greek light infantry and by Iphicrates' new-look Athenians earlier in the 4th century. It could be slung from the neck of the infantryman and strapped to his left arm. These men were also equipped with a short spear and a slashing sword, but the pike was the primary weapon. The sarissa was next to useless in a one-on-one fight, so each man was intended to fight as part of a larger, trained mass, the Macedonian phalanx. Most of the surviving information on the structure of the phalanx comes from later sources that describe the phalanx of the Hellenistic period. Yet there are a few facts that we can deduce about the original Macedonian phalanx of Philip. It consisted of basic units of 10 men, called a decus, although this number was soon increased to 16. Multiple decus units, or decades, were then combined into larger groupings called lokoi, with the separate decades being deployed side by side. The most experienced men in each decus were placed nearer the front. Early on, the Macedonian phalanx was to be formed 16 men deep and 8 men across, the men being in very close order thanks to the small size of their shields. This basic tactical unit consisted of 128 men and was called a taxius. Each taxius was commanded by an officer called a lokigos. 2 taxius combined was called a syntagma. Alongside the lokigos, there were also certain other specialized soldiers that were attached to each taxius. There was the salpingetes, who would relay messages with his bugle during the heat of battle. There was also a signalman called the semaphoros, who would give visual signals during the march with his standard, as well as an army herald, a stratocurus, who would shout out orders. There was also an aide, a hyperetes, who was to convey messages between units and do whatever the lokigos required, and finally a file closer, the oragos, who would collect any stragglers from the phalanx. As each taxius moved in their rectangular formation on the battlefield, every man would carry their sarissa upright. Only just before they were to engage their enemy would the first 5 ranks lower their pikes horizontally, creating a deadly wall of iron. The lines just behind would lower their own pikes at a 45-degree angle to protect their comrades from enemy projectiles, while the rows further back would keep their sarissas upright. Thanks to the great length of the pike, 4 deadly sarissa heads could protrude ahead of the first infantryman in the phalanx. This gave Philip and his infantry a great advantage over their neighbours. Not only could the sheer offensive power of multiple advancing sarissae steamroll any opponent, but any opposing infantry force would struggle to get past the multiple rows of pikes to even reach the holder. From the elite hoplite infantry of both the Illyrians and the Greeks to the hardened warriors of Thrace and Paeonia, all would struggle to combat Philip's sarissa-wielding phalanx with their shorter spears. Philip's phalanx was virtually unstoppable from the front. Its cohesiveness and the weight of its offensive armament was unmatched in the contemporary world. Yet this new formation was not without its flaws. The key to the phalanx's deadliness was its cohesiveness. If the formation was shattered, whether it be from fighting on uneven ground or from being attacked on either side or the rear, then the poor individual fighting skill of these soldiers would soon be apparent. The phalanx was deadly just for so long as its order was maintained. And so, in 359 BC, Philip equipped and trained his 4,000 new Macedonian recruits in this new, revolutionized system of warfare. Continuously he would train them in a variety of maneuvers to make sure they were ready for war. He ensured the phalanx formation had flexibility. For example, training his men to either double or halve the usual 16-man depth of the phalanx when necessary. Furthermore, Philip also made his infantry march and run long distances with full equipment, so that they were always fit and ready for battle when on campaign. The majority of Philip's reformed infantrymen originated from the Macedonian levy of the region, farmers, craftsmen, and men from other citizen professions. Yet among his new-look infantry, Philip also had an elite corps, the Peshetiroi, or foot companions. These men were picked for their size and strength to serve as the distinguished infantry guard of the king. The Peshetiroi, who were the Macedonian equivalent of the famed Theban sacred band, were Philip's only full-time citizen soldiers, far outclassing the rest of his infantry. Philip placed his elite Peshetiroi on the furthest right wing of the infantry line, the most prestigious place in the line. It was the Peshetiroi, for example, that accompanied Philip II on his right during his first major battle against the Illyrians in 357 BC. We hear that Philip and his elite phalanx shattered the opposing Illyrians, who proved no match for them. For the first time in years, the Macedonian infantry outclassed its neighbors. Scholars still debate the equipment of Philip's Peshetiroi. Some argue these men were armed as hoplites, wielding shorter spears, aspis shields, and heavy bronze armor, trained to add versatility to Philip's sarissa-wielding infantry line. Yet evidence for this is sparse, and many now argue that Philip equipped his Peshetiroi similarly to the rest of his reformed infantry. It was their skill and expertise that singled these soldiers out, not their equipment. Later, during the reign of Alexander, this elite force would undergo a significant change. The entirety of his phalanx was now called the Peshetiroi, and a new name was given to his elite infantry, one that would remain down through to the Hellenistic period, the Hypaspists. Philip's infantry reforms were the first great step in transforming his kingdom into the dominant power in the central Mediterranean. Yet, it was only the beginning, and in the upcoming videos we will discuss other aspects of these reforms. So subscribe and press the alarm bell to get notified. Our videos are made. This is the King's Answer.
So Philip would actually cause problems between the city-states of Greece. He would cause the city-states basically to fight each other as he stirred up trouble between them. And then the city-states would grow weak from fighting each other, and then Philip would move in and conquer them. Philip would make treaties with some Greek city-states. And then when he determined they were weak enough, he would attack them. Philip also used marriage to form alliances. Alliances are agreements between people or countries. Philip himself married 6 or 7 times just to form alliances. Demosthenes was an orator or a public speaker from Athens. And he is going to warn the Greeks that Philip was dangerous. Thing is, the Greeks wouldn't listen. Many Greeks were unhappy with their own government, so they thought, well, then fine, let Philip take us over. Maybe things will be better under Philip. So in 338 BC, Philip invades central Greece. Thebes and Athens, they used their small army to try to stop Philip, but their armies were too weak. And they're going to be defeated at the Battle of Chaeronea. Philip had now conquered all of Greece. And so now he begins preparations to fight the Persians. In 336 BC, Philip II was killed. by one of his own men. And his son Alexander will then take over.